all the good things we can expect in the next year or two. That's always a good introduction. John, thanks so much. It is a pleasure for me to be here, and I know this is let me do a disclaimer before I start, okay? Many of you know, I can see right in here my Hubble family, and there's some other people over there, but I'm going to do this off the bat because there's some people who think I know something, and I just want to let you all know, as everybody who knows me knows, I don't know anything. So if you're here to get knowledge, you're not going to get it. I'll tell you that. Second disclaimer, there is probably no one underqualified to be here in this august group than the person who's here. Boy, I got to get on my tippy toes to look over there. And if there were 3 members of my first space shuttle crew, STS-61C, we launched on the 12th of January, 1986, landed on the 18th of January, 1986. And over that period of time, my erstwhile mentor and commander, Hoot Gibson, who taught me everything I know, which will also let you know why I don't know very much. Hoot is a Navy fighter pilot. I'm not even a good fighter pilot. I'm an attack pilot from the Marine Corps, and there is a distinct difference. I won't bore you with the difference, but I was going to tell you about Hoot and my exploits. One day on orbit, he and I were sitting in the commander and pilot seat, and we were doing pilotly things, looking out the window. And all of a sudden, you know, we were floating, and we turned around, and there was this gray tape, this big piece of masking tape that Dr. Stephen Hawley, I think astronomer, Dr. George Pinky Nelson, astrophysicist, and Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz, erstwhile plasma physicist, one of the foremost in the world, they had taped us into the forward part of the compartment, which in and of itself was okay, but when we finally managed to float across the tape, we turned and we looked back, and they had taken a piece of a big magic marker, and they had written across it, "Intellectual Dead Zone." So with that in mind, that is who you have coming to speak to you today on astronomy, astrophysics, and other topics. You know, I want to wish all of you Happy New Year. I'm not sure how many of you had as phenomenal a holiday period as I did. My wife and I went home to Houston, and we were blessed to have our 2 kids and our 3 granddaughters spend the entire time with us. And the granddaughters are 3 through 9. And so if there are any of you who are not grandparents and you're not looking forward to it, boy, let me tell you, it's great. Having kids is phenomenal. Having grandchildren is incredible. And so this group would be proud to know my 9-year-old granddaughter had one request of her grandfather before Christmas. She said, I know what I want for Christmas. I said, okay, McKaylee, what is it? She said, when I come to Houston, I want to meet a real rocket scientist. And I said, man, I can probably do that. And so the morning before her dad and the rest of the family and me decided to take her to see Navy beat Missouri. There are no Missouri fans in here, since there were no eggs that came up. But that morning we spent at the Johnson Space Center and took them, and they had an opportunity to kind of look around at the mock-ups and look at what we do, what people who are in NASA do. And I must say, they were impressed. And then the 9-year-old granddaughter, before she went back to San Diego, had an opportunity to go down the street and spend some time with an old friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of Bo Beamick. And many of you will know him. Bo is a real rocket scientist. He's been around since the earliest days of human spaceflight, and he spent about an hour with her talking about rockets and stuff like that. So you do good stuff, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And I apologize beforehand again because I'm going to read what I have here. My wife tells me never do this. She says, because first of all, you don't read very well. And somebody else said, well, you know, it's okay for you to read, but when you read, we can tell it because you're not passionate in your reading the way you are when you just talk to people. Well, if you want to hear something substantive on something that you understand, I got to read it. Okay? So I'm going to do that. As I said, it is a pleasure for me to be here, and I hope all of you are off to an incredible new year. The year ahead for us is likely to be filled with some new achievements in space. At least I hope so. New discoveries we can't yet imagine. You heard about some yesterday when the Kepler folk talked to you. There's just an incredible number of missions that we're going to launch here in the coming months, beginning this month, that I think will revolutionize the way we look at our world. And I really mean it when I say that. Having been a member of the initial Hubble crew, STS-31 crew, we used to sit around in the crew quarters and talk often about what is this thing going to do and what's it going to mean. And there were all kinds of people. Most of you that I look around are too young to have any way to remember, but some of you are old enough to remember when we were getting ready to launch Hubble and the discussion, argument, whatever you want to call it, over the Big Bang Theory and all other kinds of things were really raging in 1990. And we frequently said, is this really going to mean anything? And if I were to say something that my crew universally felt, we didn't know why, but we universally felt it was that Hubble was going to change our entire approach to the species and to the world in which we lived. And I think we found, subsequent to that it has done exactly that. And every other instrument that we fly adds to that or complements it. This year just ended was a remarkable one for our agency, and if you'll let me, I just want to mention some of the astrophysics highlights that you know so well. Kepler was launched last March to conduct a census of Earth-sized planets in our galaxy. Just yesterday here, the first Kepler discoveries of large planets were announced, and many more discoveries are anticipated during its 3.5-year mission. The WISE mission was launched in December, just last month, our newest mission in the Explorer program. It'll gather a treasure trove of new data on the entire infrared sky, going much deeper than previous surveys with much better resolution. Last week, the protective cover was released and the first sky images were sent down. The first light images will be released at a press conference here tomorrow, or tomorrow, maybe not here. Here? Okay. Here, tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. I'm not going to preempt that. Ed Weiler and I were commenting coming into the hall that there are two big hurdles that any project like WISE has to overcome. You got to get the cover off successfully. And then you hope that it's in focus. And that doesn't mean a lot to many of you, but for those of you who work with me, it means a lot. The ESA, NASA, Herschel, and Planck missions were launched in May to study the far infrared universe and the cosmic microwave background with state-of-the-art instrumentation. The Chandra X-ray Observatory marked its 10th anniversary in July. SOFIA reached a milestone with its first open-door flight test last month. And Pete, you're here, aren't you? Pete Warden back there, and there are probably some, I don't know whether there's anybody here from Dryden, but you know, I want to publicly just thank Pete, the folk from Dryden, for the incredible work that was done in getting SOFIA to where it is today. Some of you may know, and most of you probably don't. They went and resurrected the airplane from the desert, where the project was really kind of struggling along. And during the month of December, when we flew a series of the initial tests and did the door openings until we finally had a full door opening test and everything, and we're ready to start actually doing some serious work with SOFIA in the months ahead, but I want to thank the whole team for what they did there. The Fermi Gamma Ray Space Telescope completed its first year of science operations, revealing a new class of gamma ray pulsars and giving us a glimpse of the nature of space-time. The James Webb Space Telescope program has made significant progress in building flight hardware, such as the primary mirror segments, observatory structure, science instruments, and other subsystems. Spitzer discovered the largest ring around Saturn. By combining data from Chandra and other optical and infrared telescopes, the most distant galaxy cluster ever found was discovered. And then there was the final Hubble Space Telescope servicing mission, bringing new life to our old friend. I call Hubble a friend because I have a personal connection with this remarkable instrument. I share that connection. I get emotional. I share that connection with a gentleman sitting down here, Dr. John Grunsfeld. John was the master, the lead EVA for STS-125, which was the final, we know, final shuttle Hubble servicing mission. I have learned a long time ago, since messing around with the Hubble folk, you never say it's the final anything. But it was absolutely incredible. And I thought, just as a sense of levity, I would tell you a little bit about our deploy day on STS-31. Some few of you may remember this, but we had trained for a number of years for the mission. Everything was pretty much in hand, and we knew what was going to go on. There were very strict timeline. Steve Hawley operating the remote manipulator system, and I as his backup. It's going to take us about 10 minutes to lift Hubble out of the payload bay and put it in its pre-deploy position so we could unfurl the solar arrays and do some other things. And about 2 hours after we started the unberthing, we had moved Hubble a matter of feet. And what we found was that as much expertise as we had and as much knowledge as we had and as precisely as the remote manipulator system had been designed, for some reason 25,000 pounds is a lot of mass. And the remote manipulator system with its joints and everything just, at least in an unclassified flight, was not accustomed to moving that much mass. And so it didn't behave exactly the way all the algorithms said. And so Steve and I struggled with reading numbers to keep it precisely where it should be so that we didn't bump it. We didn't want to do any damage, but we finally got it out and got it in the pre-deployed position. The high gain antenna were deployed with no problem. First solar array, no problem. Second solar array got about 16 inches and stopped. And I mean stopped dead. And I can remember telling Hoot, I said, this can't be. I said, you know, this was our last sim. This was our last joint simulation in Houston. We had a failure of one of the solar arrays to deploy. It had caused us to have to put Bruce McCandless and Kathy Sullivan in the suit out into the water tank. You know, they had transported them over to the WET-F, and they had to go out and exercise what we had practiced in Bristol, England with the solar arrays. They had to manually crank the solar arrays out, which was okay, but it would really just mess things up. And so we really didn't want to do that. And so for hours, the ground, it went back and forth between the ground and us on orbit. We had to keep the shuttle in free drift so we wouldn't perturbate the telescope, and we were all over the place. The thing that saved us was orbital mechanics. You know, you weren't going to fall out of the sky or anything, but attitude-wise, we were just all over everywhere, not wanting to perturb the telescope. And after a number of hours, the decision was made, okay, let's put Bruce and Kathy in the suit and let's put them out. And while they were very excited, they were probably the only people in the whole Hubble world excited about an EVA. And I was what's called the intravehicular crew member. So my task was to get them in the suit and get them outside safely. And we went down in the mid-deck, started suiting them up. I got them in the airlock, did everything to the best of my ability, made sure I followed the checklist. And let me tell you, John can tell you this, putting a human being outside a spacecraft is not trivial. And it is, although we do it all the time and we make it easy, we make it look easy, it is incredibly risky business. And my heart was beating probably harder than it has beat any time in the whole space program. A young engineer at the Goddard Space Flight Center said, hold on, this just isn't right. And he said, there's a tension monitoring module, a piece of software that we built into this thing to keep from ripping the solar arrays. And I just think it's not functioning properly. If you all will let me just send a 0 instead of a 1, I think we can take the tension monitoring module out and everything will work right. Well, on board, Bruce McCandless earlier that morning had said, oh, there's nothing wrong. It's a tension monitoring module. And for those of you who know Bruce, this was good news, but it was horrible news. Because once again, it meant that Bruce was right. And what was even worse, Bruce had been right like hours ago. So anyway, they de-energized the tension monitoring module. The solar array went out. We deployed Hubble. It was incredible to watch this massive instrument drift away from the shuttle. And in the meantime, Bruce McCandless and Kathy Sullivan, two people who had dedicated much of their astronaut lives to preparing for this mission, did not get to see it. They were locked, depressurized in the airlock, and I couldn't bring them out until after we had deployed the telescope. So that's where they spent their deploy time. And Hubble, the rest, now you know the rest of the story, but Hubble continues to make discoveries that just overwhelm all of us. And it continues, and it will continue. Things like the first ever image taken of an extrasolar planet orbiting another star. Altogether, NASA's Science Mission Directorate supports over 60 operating space missions. This year begins with 15 NASA or NASA-partnered space assets available to the astronomical community. Compare this with 5 in 1990 and 9 operating missions in 2000. These missions are of great value to the nation and help us to meet the national needs in science, education, and technological innovation. For both human and robotic missions of the future, one fact will be common to all, or one facet will be common to all. We must develop a stronger partnership with the international community. The cost and complexity of space programs require that both the achievements and the cost be shared among many nations, for no one nation can carry this burden alone. Whether it be future human voyages beyond low Earth orbit, or complex sample return missions from Mars or deep space objects, or building future large space telescopes, NASA must pursue a new era of international cooperation, a relationship where our partners are treated as equals. Astronomy and science touches our communities in many other ways as well. Last fall, I joined President Obama and the First Family on the White House lawn to celebrate the International Year of Astronomy. And for some of you who were here for breakfast this morning, you may have heard, I understand Dr. John Holdren mentioned this. And I wasn't here, but I can tell you what he told you is very, very true. To watch the President and Mrs. Obama and the girls, but even more importantly, to watch these young kids from all over Washington, D.C., to watch their eyes light up. Some of them had never seen a telescope. Some of them didn't have a clue what a telescope was. And they had an opportunity to meet Galileo. We had 2 astronomers who had dressed up as Galileo and somebody else. And they carried around ancient telescopes and the like, and they talked to the kids. John was there, Sally Ride was there, Buzz Aldrin, Mae Jemison. And they had an opportunity to interface with real live astronauts as they got ready to view through the telescopes. And it was incredible. The whole lawn of the White House was covered with telescopes, inflatable planetariums, and these astronaut heroes that I mentioned. Present with us were 150 students from D.C., Maryland, Virginia schools who learned of crater formation on the moon, viewed Jupiter and its 4 Galilean moons, as well as distant stars and nebula in our galaxy. The President and First Lady joined the fun, peering through some of the telescopes and mingling with the students. And I'll tell you, it was not a normal night. It was cold that night. And the President and First Lady were out there for a good 45 minutes to an hour, just going from telescope to telescope, planetarium display to planetarium display. With us that night was a West Virginia high school student who had discovered a new astronomical object, a strange type of neutron star never discovered before. What's remarkable about Lucas Boyard's discovery is that he made it after he had studied 2,000 data points collected from the Robert Byrd Green Bank telescope and originally found nothing. But like young would-be astronomers, he was determined to scrutinize his data, looking for more. His discovery was almost overlooked in the radio interference streaming in from space. But he was persistent, he was dedicated, and as a result, he made history. Also with us that night was Carolyn Moore, a 14-year-old in love with science. She discovered a supernova. It wasn't your average supernova either. This exploding star was so dim, it was 1,000 times dimmer than a typical supernova. Moore, a 9th grader, won the distinction of being the youngest person ever to discover a supernova. What I witnessed that night on the White House lawn served as a reminder that astronomy and science can inspire the next generation to study the science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM subjects so critical to America's future workforce. Of critical importance before we can inspire the rising generation, however, is to expose them to your craft and the tools you use. You must become engaged with students as early as elementary school and help them to learn that who you are and what you do, why you're passionate about astronomy and astrophysics, and the magic they brought to your lives. You have to share that with them. The years ahead promise a steady stream of new missions and new discoveries. This spring, the James Webb Space Telescope, our next astrophysics flagship mission to study the distant universe in the infrared, will go through its critical design review, aiming for a 2014 launch. SOFIA, I mentioned earlier, the largest airborne observatory in the world that will study objects in the far infrared, will produce initial science this year as it moves toward its full operational capability in 2014. NuSTAR, the first focusing hard X-ray telescope mission to study black holes, supernova remnants, and the most extreme active galaxies, will launch by early 2012. The Gravity and Extreme Magnetism, one of our Small Explorer programs, or GEMS mission, is a new Small Explorer X-ray mission being prepared for launch in 2014. And ASTRO-H, Japan's sixth X-ray astronomy mission in collaboration with NASA, is also being readied for launch in 2014. And there will be more sounding rockets and more long-duration balloon missions. But what of the discoveries we cannot predict as this new year begins? Thus far, more than 400 extrasolar planets have been discovered orbiting other stars. Last month, a super-Earth was discovered that might be an all-water world. When will someone in this audience discover a Pandora? A real Pandora, like the one in James Cameron's fabulous new movie? And will such a discovery open a positive Pandora's box, changing the way citizens of Earth view ourselves and our places in the cosmos? Only time and the best science will tell. These are exciting times to be astrophysicists, astronomers, grad students, and researchers. It's a pretty exciting time to be the NASA administrator also. The scientific community and NASA have a relationship that dates back to the agency's earliest days. Yielding scientific discoveries is the bedrock of NASA's existence. I just noticed I'm giving you a light show back here as I play around with the computer. As administrator, I look upon it as a partnership. This partnership takes many forms: setting priorities, developing new technologies, building spacecraft, and operating missions. One of our biggest challenges is balancing resources between older facilities and enabling new missions and technologies. We must also continuously work to optimize the agency's fiscal management, and I appreciate how your community has worked with us to improve our efficiency. Many here are participating in the next decadal survey, identifying more promising areas of discovery in astronomy and astrophysics for the decade ahead, and designing a program to achieve it. This decadal process, first introduced in astronomy, has become a model to be followed in other disciplines. Some of you serve on NASA advisory committees. Others participate in peer reviews to assure that we get the best scientific return from these missions. I want to thank all of you for your service. Because of it, NASA addresses the most compelling science of our time, a benchmark of excellence that is a model for the world. Space science requires a healthy space program and new ideas and innovative approaches. This can only be achieved from a trained and skilled workforce. To attract the best workers, NASA must continue to develop missions that inspire as well as educate us. So another big challenge is finding ways to share your discoveries with the public. It's critical that we do so effectively, and I know that this community has been very active in communicating with the public through press announcements, partnering with museums and planetariums, holding teacher workshops, and developing classroom materials for young students. I'm sure all of you would like to know what direction President Obama will choose for the future of the space program. All I can say for now is that NASA is working closely with the Executive Office of the President in helping him determine the best path forward. What I know, however, is that science is important to our President, important to NASA, and crucial to whatever way forward we are to follow. I can make this commitment to you as the NASA administrator. The future of human spaceflight will not be paid for out of the hide of the science budget. Let me close with a little story, and I learned this when I was on the White House lawn. Last summer, in honor of the 400th anniversary of Galileo's astronomical discoveries, and in commemoration of the International Year of Astronomy, one of Galileo's telescopes came to America for the public to see. For 5 months, the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia not only displayed the telescope on loan from Italy, but also created an entire exhibit about Galileo and his age of discovery. By our standards today, the telescope looked quite crude. Only one of 2 original telescopes used by Galileo that survived. There are only 2 that survive today. But it helped spark a revolution in science whose consequences still echo across the centuries. If we continue to develop our partnerships, the day will come when Hubble and the Webb space telescopes will look just as primitive to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren and future generations as the Galilean telescopes look to us today. So let's embrace our future together. Along with new science will come the excitement and turbulence that always follows new discoveries. You and I together, along with our international partners, must forge ahead, mindful that our task remains to develop missions and programs that give value back to the taxpayer. We must identify new ways to inspire the next generation of explorers. The nation and the international science community expect no less of us. With your partnership and cooperation, NASA stands ready to deliver. Thanks very much for letting me be with you this afternoon.